ask you a question, and that is, what is in your life's blueprint? This is the most important and crucial period of your lives, for what you do now and what you decide now at this age may well determine which way your life shall go. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl, but by all means, keep moving.
Thank you for making the time to join us this evening for the Changing Landscape of Education Funding webinar. This webinar is organized by Switch Edu Online, which is a dynamic new private online school targeting primary school grades 1 to 6. I'm Nicky Blumenfeld, so most people know me as Nicky B because I've been on radio for 25 years. But what most of you probably don't know is that I also have a long history in education, and I remain passionate about education, and I still teach in various capacities. But most importantly, I want to introduce to you tonight's panel members joining us. We have Percy Moleke. Percy is the CEO of Gauteng City Region Academy, GCRA, which is responsible for building a pool of skilled, capable, and ethical people as a workforce for the Gauteng City region. The GCRA does this through different interventions like bursaries, internships, learnerships, and skills programs. Welcome, Percy.
Thank you, Nikki. Good to be here.
Good to have you here. We also have Rihanna Rousseau, who's an author and the founder of Next Generation Consultants. Rihanna is regarded as a visionary and is one of Africa's leading experts on social innovation, sustainable development, and reporting. She's developed Africa's first impact assessment model to measure the impact as well as the return of investment of social investments and development models and programs which are widely used across the continent by social and impact investors, donors, grant makers, and development organizations. Welcome, Rihanna.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And John Gilmore's with us. John is the board chairperson of the Global Teachers Institute, or the GTI, which is a teacher development network of educators, schools, and organizations committed to developing high-quality teachers through school-based initial teacher education programs, international exchanges, and collaborative platforms. And welcome to you too, John.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us, and we're really glad to be part of this important conversation.
Thank you, John. And last but not least, we have Mita Vanda. Mita is the business development lead at GoShare South Africa Crowdfunding, which is a donation-based education crowdfunding platform that enables tertiary students to raise funds to cover their fees. The platform prides itself and is committed to being part of the ongoing efforts of democratizing access to tertiary education. Welcome, Mita. I know it was a last-minute joining. Thank you for joining us.
No worries. Great being here. Thanks, Nikki.
Good. Thanks now. And welcome everybody who's online and joining us. I think we all recognize that looking at the issues around funding, how to get it are really important. And we all know that the cost of private education is prohibitive to the majority of children in South Africa. Most simply can't afford private school fees, even at an entry level. Currently, the majority of scholarships and financial support provided in the education sector target to an extent high school, but mostly tertiary students. The primary school segment tends to be overlooked, leaving many learners with limited financial support options. As a private online school, Switch Edu Online was inspired to organize this webinar with various industry stakeholders to engage broadly about the challenges faced by the players within the funding and fundraising space. The other aim of the evening is also to open a discussion around possibly partnering with interested bodies to create a scholarship fund for the primary school segment. And we'll be talking about Switch Edu Online's initiative in this regard a little bit later. And I must remind you, please don't forget that, and I see people are already, thank you for that, but please use the chat facility to ask questions and to even initiate online networking. We'll be doing the question segment later on in the program, but as we move along, please feel free to send your questions so that we can address them. And without further ado, let's proceed. I'm going to start off tonight with Percy, who, as I said, is the CEO of GCRA, the Gauteng City Region Academy. Percy, for those who don't know much about GCRA, please can you share with us what your organization does?
Thank you, Nikki, and good afternoon, evening to everyone and the colleagues on the panel and our participants. The Gauteng City Region Academy is a component of the Gauteng Provincial Government. We are located in the Department of Education in Gauteng, but we serve the entire Gauteng, as you correctly pointed out when you started, that what we do is we try with different interventions to facilitate the availability of skilled workforce for the Gauteng City Region, what we call the Gauteng City Region, which is basically the Gauteng province, which is now called the City Region. So we do this through various interventions, and our intervention starts from a schooling level. So we like to say, instead of looking at us as youth development, we like saying we help young people transition from school to the world of work or to economic participation. And we start with career guidance. It's one of the programs that we do. We, in fact, going to have a very big provincial launch somewhere in April, beginning of May, to coordinate everybody's effort around career guidance so that we prepare our young people for the labor market while they are still at school. We then also help them as they transition into post-school, whether it's university or TVET, and there we offer them bursaries. So we're one of the biggest bursary programs, I think second largest to NSFAS, given that we only have a provincial footprint. This year we're funding something like 4,000 young people in institutions, various institutions of their choice, in areas of study of their choice as well. And then we also have what we call getting them into the labor market, giving them a foot into the labor market interventions, which is your internships, as well as learnerships as well. As we all know, without work experience, most young people struggle to find work. So an internship gives them that foot into the labor market, but it gives them some bit of a stipend as well to enable them to continue searching for work, as we know that searching for employment is one of the most expensive exercises for our young people. And you know, the internship programs and the stipend that we provide helps them with that. And here we do it with various partners. We place them at various host employers. One of the big programs that we have now is the Presidential Youth Employment Program, where we have just over 40,000 young people placed in schools across Gauteng. And they do various things, but that gives them some experience. It keeps them busy. It teaches them some values, work ethics and so on, but it also gives them some bit of money. So kind of alleviating poverty as well as empowering these young people. There's some training that happens to it. They get some skills with it and so on. Now,
Fantastic.
almost similar to that is the learnerships, and which almost works the same, but then at least with that, they get a qualification thereafter. So in a nutshell, that's what we do as Gauteng City Region Academy, over and above that, focusing on the public sector. So a very focused program on helping the public sector, skilling the public sector, where we need to have a capable and ethical public service. That's one of the big programs that we do.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, apart from receiving funding from government, do you have fundraising initiatives that you are required to conduct as part of your fundraising efforts? And if so, what are they?
No, we don't. As government, we try and shy away from doing that. We use the money that we have as government. So one of the things that we do through our bursary program, for example, is some of the partners, they come to us and ask us to work with them on their bursary programs. The beauty thereof is because we are government, so we've got a bursary program which has got a system and processes. Administering the bursary program is what we do. So then the partners would put in money to fund additional students at no fee whatsoever. So all the money then that the partner gives goes towards a bursary, towards a student, funding student. So that's what we do. We don't raise money, but also in our workforce development programs, one of the things that we do as well is when we work with the partners, so we can source young people for private sector companies, for example, where they need to place them, for the BBBE scores and so on. We can source them at no fee whatsoever. And so we don't raise money, but we try and help the private sector, young people, and government as well with these facilitations at no fee whatsoever, because at least we've got government funding in that regard. We try and make sure that the rent that we goes a long way and goes to young people themselves through these interventions. So we don't raise money as such, but we stretch the rent. So, we give you 5 people, young people, we can pay maybe for 2 of those stipend, and you as a private sector or as a host employer, you can pay for the other 3 at no fee whatsoever in terms of facilitation thereof, right?
So clearly you are engaging with the private sector, obviously, and from what you're telling me, to support in reaching these goals. But what would you say are the biggest challenges faced by the sector at large regarding funders and grantees?
Look, I think there are a few things. One is that over the years, the number of young people, learners from schools who pass matric and pass matric with a bachelor's pass, for example, has increased significantly, whereas the funding has not increased as much. So that's the one. But alongside that is also the question of space within our public institutions in particular. So there's only so many spaces in universities, public universities, and the number of young people pursuing that is increasing. Alongside that is the fact that we have as a country, and unfortunately so as a country, have always been pushing and focused on university studies and neglected what we call the college, the TVET colleges. Studies thereof, which is the middle level and to upper level skills as well, the occupational skills. So the funding thereof is a big challenge. If we thought funding at universities is a problem, we should get into that space. It's also a big problem in that space as well. I mean, there are issues of reputation and so on as well that comes with that, that comes into play. So there's a big problem there. But also within the universities where there is funding, I dare say there's a lot of inefficiency. And what I mean by that is that, we've got the privilege, and it's a very humbling privilege and opportunity to play very closely in this space. So one of the things that we are seeing, and I know young people won't be happy with me saying this because they fight with me all the time. One of the things that we are seeing is that because we are not coordinated, there are young people who are lucky by their nature, and they get multiple sponsorships. So you find that they are funded by 2-3 sponsors for full cost of study. And then on the other hand, you've got other young people who have no funding whatsoever. So there's a lot of inefficiencies. And then these young people then come to us and say, can I get a refund? I have money in my account, I need a refund, right? So we don't do refunds. Instead, we take that money and fund other kids as well. But there's a lot of inefficiency in the system in that regard. We are sitting with young people with huge credit amounts in their accounts because of this double funding, triple funding from different sponsors. So we need to improve there and improve coordination and the efficiencies thereof. The other thing is that if we are talking about building this economy and requiring skills, one of the biggest gaps is that we are not funding postgraduate studies. We are all focusing on funding undergrad studies. Postgrads are not being funded. We have changed our policy as GCRA. We have started funding some postgrads, but as you can imagine, our funding is limited. So we need to come together as funders and as sponsors and say, how can we improve? And we don't have to put money in one pot, but if we can understand the challenges, the landscape, how things work, and all adopt a particular policy that improves the efficiencies, but also spreads the resources wider. And we can have young people who are funded. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Anna. That's so interesting to hear. Postgrad, same problem with the primary schools. There's so much that you're telling us, and I want to touch on that a little bit later in the program. But I think let's move to the next speaker now. But please keep those thoughts, Percy. We're going to come back to them. Our next panelist is Mita Vanda, who is the Business Development Lead at GoShare South Africa crowdfunding. Now, Mita, we know that the cost of tertiary education, as we can hear, is very limited and prohibitive. And you decided, you were one of the founders of GoShare South Africa, I think as a student, and you and your colleagues decided to grab the bull by the horns to establish this crowdfunding platform, GoShare, in 2021, GoShare SA. Tell us a little bit about your platform and how it works.
Thank you, Nikki. So basically, GoShare is a crowdfunding platform. It's a digital one. It's web-based. And what we do is we basically connect donors, just like you and me and everyone else, just your community members. We connect those people to students who are looking for funds, right? So what we do is students apply on the platform, they fill in their details, how much it is that they owe. And obviously we cross-check this with the university as well. And then we upload them onto the platform, and then they're eligible to get donations from everyday citizens and community members that actually care for the cause. So in a nutshell, that's how the platform actually works. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. So you're actually appealing to individuals and private companies, I suppose.
Yeah, so we're appealing to individuals and private companies as well. Yeah.
Now, the platform, your platform speaks to this global trend of using digital tools to raise funds, particularly for education. How
Yes.
do you think that this way of working will shape the future of funding and fundraising?
So what we believe in is, we're trying to cultivate a culture of investing in one another as people, right? What we realize is that there are companies that are giving out bursaries to individuals, but there's very few beneficiaries of those bursaries. Whereas the larger community population, university population is not necessarily catered for, So what we see is that people that are catered for are the ones that get really good marks. So that's your 80s and above and your 70s in high school when they apply into university. But we find that the people as well that are in the 60s and 50s don't actually have access to those bursaries. And they are the ones that are most susceptible to financial exclusion. So we feel like when we cultivate this culture of investing in one another, then we're on the right track in terms of, you know, where we would like to see tertiary education becoming, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what about the renewable aspect of fundraising? I mean, how do you manage that as a platform? Do you manage that? And I speak about renewable as in, it doesn't make sense to fund somebody for 1 year when maybe the course is 3 or 4 years.
Yes. So that is something that we actually are looking into, because what we know that when a student comes into university in their first year, and they get funded by, say, a donor, say, Nicky, you want to donate to that particular student. Next year, we try and facilitate a relationship between yourself and the student. And it works in favor of the donor as well, so that you know how the student is doing throughout the journey. And as a donor, you can opt to continue paying for that student's fees, or if not, then the student can reapply the next year and we can put their profile up again. So there is that renewable factor. We try and include that into our offering, because we understand that you know, funding is not easy to come by. And so we try and make sure that our students do get the best of what GoShare has to offer.
And I'm sure that's a motivating factor as well.
Yeah.
And what are the biggest challenges that you've experienced with students raising funds?
So I think the first challenge, which kind of speaks to how big the problem is that we had an influx of applications when we opened up. So we had over, I think, 1,000 people within the first 2 weeks that we opened applications for. And mind you, we're a startup, so we are quite limited in terms of capacity. And we had an overwhelming amount of students that are asking questions, you know, how do we become a part of this and how do we get funding? And we chose, I think, 40 students. And it's a difficult thing to do, to have to choose only 40 from 1,000 students. So I think that was the first challenge, and it speaks to the bigger issue that there is a general lack of funds within the South African university ecosystem. And then the next thing was actual securing of the funding. So that's what we're currently grappling with now. We've partnered with GradStar, and we do have other partnerships as well, but we haven't yielded as much as we would like to yield. There's still a lot of students that are underfunded. We've actually only been able to fund, I think, 3 students so far, which is big for us as a startup, you know. And I think we're just trying to build those relationships with corporates so that we can be able to get some funding from them. And I think one of the most important things that would help us is to have a founding partner. So there's a similar platform that is operating in South Africa as well, and their founding partner is Standard Bank. And we've kind of found that that helps a lot, because it covers the internal costs, and whatever we receive from donors is able to go then directly to the students. So yeah, that I think those are the 2 main challenges that I'd put forward.
I think that's also an amazing initiative, because, you know, it becomes almost more personal, if you like.
Yeah.
It's also brought up some other questions, but I'm going to move to our next contributor, Rihanna. Rihanna is the author, is an author and the founder of Next Generation Consultants. Rihanna, please share with us what your company does and a little bit about your experience as a respected social innovator across the continent, because I think that's also relevant.
Thank you so much, Nicky. Yes, we work with social impact investors, multinational corporations, high net worth individuals. So basically from a funding perspective, and we help them design their impact investment strategies. And then we also measure the impact and return on investment those investments yield. I think what people underestimate is the amount of time and effort that goes into the design of an investment portfolio to contribute to communities. And we speak about portfolios, but you know, in South Africa, we have got over 16 different portfolios. So those are the options for investors to invest in. And so, yeah, so that's part of our work. That is our strategic and advisory and consulting work. And then from a research and development perspective, which is our Pan-African work, is really to understand how social and impact investment, the ecosystem operates, what are the trends, what are the insights, what are the lessons learned, which kind of approaches work or don't work, how do we scale, how do we replicate, how do we innovate across the continent, and we produce that report annually, except for the last 2 years because of COVID, because there weren't any discernible trends. But this year, we've just released our first impact scenarios because we believe there are multiple futures that are waiting. So it's not single trends, but there are different futures waiting the sector. So I just want to stand with that. So it's impact and consulting, and it's research and development and impact management. Those are the fields in which we play. Thank you, Nikki.
And I'm sure we could have a whole discussion around what is happening on the African continent, the differences and the commonalities. But I want to move on with you, Rihanna. Now, here's a quote from a grantee, and it's a quote that I certainly relate to, considering I've also been one of those who's looked for funding for various things. And it goes like this: the grant review process is like the foundation is attempting to find flaws in what we are proposing. And I've also felt that. It feels like sometimes funders make it difficult for a person to access the funds. How do you think funders can strike a balance between this particular pain point with measuring the return on investment and other internal impact requirements?
I think we have to acknowledge, as a sector, with resources comes responsibility and accountability. And I think fund seekers always forget this. The person who gives also have stakeholders and shareholders. It's not their money either, so they're custodians of it. And so there's due diligence for a reason. There's due diligence to ensure the right organizations, the right kind of interventions get funded. So they have to make sure that those who get the funding will also be accountable and responsible for the outcome and results. So I do want to just plead with grant seekers that they understand that there are rules of engagement, and it's governance, it's legislated, you know, it's envisaged in the King codes, it's in the sustainability reporting guidelines. We cannot move away from it. So it's here to stay. Due diligence, I also want to caution you, is going to get tougher. The reason why it's going to get tougher and more difficult for grant seekers is quite simply because our sector has been exposed for bribery and corruption. And so we have to tighten the kind of network in that. And the last point that I just want to make is as well is there is balance in applying for funding. We can give 10,000 Rand to 10,000 organizations, or we can give R1 million to an organization that will impact 1 million beneficiaries. And those are very tough decisions to make. And they don't need to be made, and they won't be made on emotions, your appeal, how amazing your organization is. It's only one criteria, it's the evidence. And because we want to see change, so we need to make sure the money we give will affect the change. So if you can provide scale, if you can provide innovation, if you can provide accountability, and you can be responsible for the funds, you will not have a problem in getting funds.
Okay, yeah, that's an important point. And what do you see about the evolution of the education sector, moving from what we've discovered through COVID, from bricks and mortar to online learning? Have you started seeing a shift of traditional funders playing more into the digital space?
Yes, for sure. I don't know if your audience is aware, but we actually had a panel discussion with funders in the educational sector, and they were very clear about it. Firstly, I want people to understand that the educational sector has lost at least 30 to 40% of its funding. Funders are not focusing on traditional portfolios and focus areas. The budgets have declined, the resources have declined. So already, a quarter 30 to 40%, more than that, has disappeared. So where funders are looking at is innovations that can provide scale. And the scale will only come through technology. And so therefore, there is a move from the budgets that have been reduced to scale, innovation, technology platforms to reach larger group of beneficiaries, because that's the future. So absolutely, I want to confirm that trend, that yes, funders are moving into the digital space. But I think what is important as we transition into this digital economy and digital future and digital edutech, as we refer to it in our sector, there is still opportunity to pilot, to test approaches. So we're not expecting, like perfect solutions, because we are in a transitioning phase. But I do want to caution one other trend that's related to reduced resources and very focused resources, and that is blended financial models. So you're not going to just get your full cost recovery. You've got to perform. So a lot of the funding is going to be focused on results-based funding and blended financial models, grants, as well as technical assistance, as well as guarantees, as well as loans. Just to follow on from Meetha's kind of point, because he's got a platform, you've got to show your performance, and then you're not going to just get money for free. You've got to repay back some of that. It's going to be in the form of a loan or a guarantee. So those are the big changes as far as edutech is concerned.
Amazing. All of you keep sparking more questions in my mind. And I'm sure this is just a reminder to any of you who are not on the panel, please post your questions. I'm thinking of a whole lot of things to ask. So post your questions so we can address them a little bit later. Next up, I want to move on to John. And thank you so much for that, Rihanna. John Gilmore, who's on the board, or the board chairperson of the GTI, the Global Teachers Institute, which I know is a very important organization in terms of the education space. And for those who know what you do, I'm sure they'll agree with me. But tell us a little bit more about GTI and what makes it unique in the larger education ecosystem, John.
Thank you, Nikki. We exist to solve a few problems. The first problem is that there are more teachers retiring than teachers entering the profession. The second is that there are currently 1.2 billion people in Africa, and in 2030 there will be 2 billion, and 50% of those will be children. So if we look at that reality, whatever we do, whether we integrate technology, whether we go online, we need teachers. We need teachers who are adaptive, who are flexible, who are empathetic, who can shift, who can be bimodal, who can be fully engaged. And they need, to really be that, we need a new cohort of young teachers who are quite revolutionary in their thinking. And that's what we set up to do. So where our flip has come, instead of waiting for the teachers to come out of university, we've committed to an apprenticeship model, a model in which at the minute the child leaves school and says, I want to be a teacher, we say, get in the school. And we do immerse the student in the school for 4 years, and we complete their studies through distance learning. Now that's a complete flip of the model to placing practice as a priority over just the theory. And of course they're integrated and both are necessary, but I'm afraid we've got the model wrong historically. The last problem we're trying to solve is that a lot of young Black people and people who were disadvantaged historically do not aspire to become teachers. And so often the people who become teachers are people who couldn't make it into other professions or get into courses of study. So we mitigate that by inviting all the young people at school to consider themselves as activists and future leaders. And the best place for future leaders and the best place for activism is right in the heart of education. And so we've got a wonderful story now of a track record of a number of years. We launched officially, freed ourselves from the Leap Science and Math schools where we started the project, and in 2017 began independently with our own governance framework. And we've got beautiful stories to tell of young people who came through that program who are now leading schools or leading organizations, education organizations. So we are creators of hope, and we are hope merchants in our work.
Fantastic. And what support does GTI require to achieve its goals? What would you say? What do you need in terms of support?
Well, if we're targeting young people who are coming from communities where there is no money, then we need total support. We need wraparound support. And why would we target those young people? We have a slightly unhealthy aspiration in our country, not slightly, very unhealthy aspiration for teachers. They want to go where the resources are. So they are educated to teach in a well-resourced environment. When you come with resilience, with understanding and insight on your context, you aspire to go back to that context. And that's what we're trying to do, take people back into the heart of where the work is most needed, not where the work is a luxury or an option. So, of course, we need wraparound support. And so we're fortunate in that we are subsidized. We have one or two of our programs subsidized by government. And we're in partnership with the DBE, particularly in Mpumalanga. And we have partnerships with SACE and the various education authorities. And we obviously have a very strong base of core funders. Some of them South African corporates, one or two international foundations, Boeing in the USA, Maitrey from Scotland, and we're building that base, and we're trying to cultivate a counter narrative to invite people to come to the most exciting profession that is available to anybody. And we feel sorry for those who don't choose that particular route.
Yes. What are the challenges? In fact, I'm going to ask you a double-pointed question. But what are the challenges you experience in your sector and or organization in terms of funding and fundraising? And why should donors be putting their money into GTI's work?
Well, the challenge is a common challenge, but when you start funding a student in their first year of university, where do you start to celebrate your success for a donor's point of view? So you've got to take a long view. You can't just simply celebrate the graduation. You want to celebrate the integration, the induction, the rise through the education ranks into leadership. So we really are taking a 10, 15-year view of this. Now, I know that that Switch is taking an even longer view on it. And one of the challenges that Switch has is that when you start at a primary level, you're taking at least a 12-year view just to get out of school, and then an additional 4 years just to get out of university. So it's more like a 25-year plan. So the big challenge is funders want quick return. They want before and after photographs. They want to see something quickly. So you have to work very hard to get anything beyond a 2 or 3 year grant, and yet you've committed to a 5-year program. So
Yes.
that's a key challenge. And how do we go about that, and how do we motivate that? We just keep coming back to the one thing we all know, is that the only way to flip an education system is by ensuring that the teachers themselves liberate themselves and can become agents of change rather than just perpetuate the status quo. And we need that mindset to be taught, and that's where the GTI is focused.
Thank you so much. We're getting some lovely questions coming through, and we are going to move on to the question and answer section in a moment. But as I mentioned, before we do that, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to talk a little bit about the scholarship fund, because we, like I think all the panelists here at Switch Edu Online, are looking to find partners in the funding and NGO spaces, and I'm sure this also relates to all of you, but funders that are also committed and passionate about education. Just to give you a little bit of background, at the beginning of the academic year, Switch Edu Online, the school, offered a handful of student scholarships because they'd expressed the desire to join the school, but they couldn't afford to cover the school fees for the year. And then somehow word got out, and many students started contacting the school to find if they could also be considered to join for free. And it became clear from this that many students need support in accessing quality education in South Africa at a primary school level. Because as I mentioned before, most support is granted to high school or tertiary students. So because of this experience, we were inspired to create a scholarship fund that assist students, particularly in the primary school phases, primarily grade 1 to 6. So that's where we're at with this at the moment. So we're looking, the Switch Scholarship Fund aims to address this fundamental gap and provide an opportunity for financial support so that learners can enter the world of education on an equal footing and thus increase their chances of success in the future, be it in high school, tertiary, or in their career paths. All what we're looking for is that all donations will go towards paying school fees for 100 children from across South Africa to access this quality primary school education. It's for grades 1 to 6. And how the fund will work is that we're hoping that Switch can partner with NGOs, organizations, individuals to collectively raise funds. The funds will be used to pay school tuition fees, and Switch will also offer 10 students free tuition for the year as part of that, of the 100 as students or children. So all interested parties who might like to partner, please direct message Lisa with your details, and the directors of the school will be in touch during the course of the week. Or you can also email Lisa. We'll post Lisa's email on the chat group. And obviously these discussions we're having today are exploratory, but we're hoping that we can engage more and see where this will lead. So whether you're a partner or in attendance or somebody in the audience, or maybe you want to share this information with people you might know, so that really we can make a call for that. Or maybe there's an NGO that has a pool of grade 1 to 6 learners who could benefit from this fund, or a private funding institution that may be open to discussion. But I think let's go back to the questions now, to the question and answer section. And I think there's some really interesting questions which have come through. Could I read them out? I think that's the best way. There was a question from Sharanjit on digital transformation. And I'm going to address this to all of you, and please feel free, any of the panelists, to give information. Who will provide the data, the connectivity, and the tablets? 70% of our learners do not have more than one plate of food a day. No transport, poor socioeconomic circumstances. Do those 70% not belong to South Africa? Anyone who wants to address this? Rihanna, John, Mita, Percy?
Yes,
good question. I think it's a, sorry.
So my point here is, if I just look at the points raised, we're thinking with our current kind of thinking. If we think about technology and the future of education using technology, I just want to make this
Sorry,
point.
Rihanna, can you turn off your speaker for a minute, please? It's feeding back. Not your mute, oh, just your speaker.
Okay.
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, so we're thinking with current kind of thinking. In future, we will have 5G. We won't need data. I mean, you know, that's one of the primary objectives of our government, is to make access to internet free for everybody wherever you are. So I think we shouldn't be constrained with our current kind of thinking about where the future is going. So as we develop technology, as we develop platforms, as we develop solutions, the future is going to look completely different. We may not need tablets. You know, there will be another kind of platform. So I just want people to think, and I fully get Charanjit's point around the 70%, but the question is that an educational problem, or is that a social development problem? So I don't want us to confuse issues, because then we keep on in the same kind of development cycles. We really have to step outside of this and look at the best solution for the country and the 70% of our children that is being kept back. And it may not be with current kind of thinking. So that's just the point that I want to raise there. Thank you, Nikki.
Very good points. Percy, I think you also wanted to add to that.
Thank you, Nikki. I just wanted to say, and I mean, I take the point that Rihanna is making, right? But I think we must also be careful not to perpetuate inequalities, because, you know, yes, it is about the future, but we also have to think about the current, right? And the current shapes the future. The fact that, you know, we will be having 5G or, you know, connectivity, free connectivity, whatever that is being promised, doesn't necessarily guarantee certain things, because sometimes it's not even just about connectivity. It is about whether these children have support, adequate support in their families to enable that connectivity and that accessibility as well. So it's just and I take the point, right? So maybe one of the things that we also need to think about is, instead of raising money or trying to get money to build another system parallel to the system that we have, why don't we then try and strengthen what we currently have, right? Because, I mean, Gauteng has proved that public education can be improved. And it has improved significantly. Of course, there are still gaps, but the improvements are there, right? So why don't we try and strengthen that, instead of then, you know, crowding resources out and moving resources to elsewhere and then create a parallel system, because we know what will happen, right? It's only a few that will be able to access that as well. But, you know, it's a longer discussion. It's just a word of caution that it's not just about connectivity as well. It is other things as well that play into that space.
And I think that's something, you know, it's a long discussion. This really could be a long discussion. But I think it's something that we at Switch Edu Online have also been thinking about. You know, it does start even at primary school level. And, you know, this is what we really need to address. Struan Robertson says, I think John is making an important point about educational practice, the current modern thinking, wherein we think outcomes of one-to-one with resources, particularly technology. But I feel that learning outcomes are also about the teacher-learner relationship, basic materials and apparatus, and a space of shared passion for learning and inquiry. Perhaps you want to comment on that, John. It's more of a statement than a question, but worth engaging.
I certainly do want to comment on that, and particularly in the light of the previous conversation which Sharanjit initiated, because I do think we can't get into binary thinking here. We can't think that one is at the exclusion of another. And sometimes in this conversation, we fall into that way of talking. So to me, we have to develop the mindsets that say, work with what you have where you are and aspire to improve that as quickly as possible. But if we develop a mindset that always says, you can't do the thing properly until you've got something you haven't got, we perpetuate oppression. So we must not create the aspiration around technology as though that is the only gatekeeper to learning. It is a gatekeeper, but we can unlock it. There are more cell phones in South Africa than there are people. If we use cell phone technology as a dedicated way of empowering young people to support the other work. And I want to just also link to the point that Percy's made. Of course, we can't polarize with the two sectors. And the temptation to do that is great because of the high level of frustration that exists in the public benefit organization sector around working with government. What we found with a GTI is that we had to let go our assumptions and be open to understanding the shared value proposition, to stop thinking about what the government can do for us, and to start thinking about how our partnership can create parallel and shared value for both entities. And I think that takes a lot of work, but it's worth it.
Absolutely. These are investments into our future as people of South Africa. Also, thanks to Shanjit, who commented, only way a country can grow if its young people succeed. Thank you again, John, for the holistic expression. Thank you, Percy, also for commenting there. We must be careful, as you said, not to perpetuate inequalities. We already have a two-tier system of inequality. Yes. sorry, I'm just checking the messages here. From Stephanie, this message is for Percy. We are an organization that assists young adults between 18 to 35 with intellectual disabilities. Most of our students come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Can we apply? Percy, I see you've given your email, so that's there it
I
is.
responded to say they can DM me. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, fantastic. Thank you. I'm not sure if there's any other questions coming up, but there's a couple that I actually wanted to address. And the one about is, and I'm going to again open it to all the panelists. This one is about the COVID era and how it's impacted on many across different sectors in terms of cuts. How have each of your organizations been affected? And would you be able to quantify this? Anyone want to respond? Has there been an impact? John, yes.
Can I say something, please?
Oh, there's a Sharanjit.
I
Okay.
put my hand up.
Okay. Let's hear what John has to say, then I'll come to you, Sharanjit.
Okay.
I'll be brief. Every organization has been impacted through COVID-19, and the indirect impact even of the war in Ukraine is still going to have its impact on funding. So we have to be agile. We have to be adept at re-engaging and reimagining all the time. We have to put cell phones in that. At the GTI, we made sure we got phones and laptops to our students so that they could adapt. Of course, there are costs to that. We borrowed, we took secondhand, we did whatever we could to mitigate that. But in terms of the actual funding, I think we have to keep reinventing ourselves, and the real solution does lie in the intent that Switch has launched today. That is, let's find common thrusts. Let's work as syndicates. Let's work as coalitions. It's a very difficult thing to do, but I do believe that if you are working alone, you will be eaten up in this time.
Good point. Thank you for that, John. Sharanjit, yes.
Okay.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background, because you've been posing some interesting questions.
My background, John, would you like to hear my background? This is my 56th year in STEM education. 8 European countries and 28 years in South Africa. So I'll start with first saying a very big thank you and a hug to John for his holistic views, and another big hug for Percy. Thank you for looking at issues of equality and oppression. I can assure you that slavery is coming through the front door for the large majority of Black South Africans. It isn't even going to come through the back door, for the simple reason that until we begin to improve our math, science, technology, language, and now the new 4IR results, they're not going to go into the next step. I was very lucky to receive the World Economic Forum Schwab Award and listen to Professor Schwab very carefully. Most definitely 60 to 65 jobs are going to be lost to our young people. If they do not have data analysis, if they do not understand artificial intelligence, coding and robotics. Math Center, and this is a very contradictory statement to COVID-19, it was the greatest gift to the Math Center. Because the day everything stopped, we began online. And we ran in the first month our first coding and our first data analysis course based on Cambridge Analytics. And then we began with the rest of the content in mathematics and science. How it impacted funding, I think all the colleagues know. Because honestly, truthfully, it is just how it goes, unless and until a government recognizes one imperative. There are only two, education and economics. But unless DB recognizes that as a country, we need to stop being project-based. We need to do what the Constitution says, education for all our children. And until my last breath, I hope to complete at least 65 years in the service of children's education for STEM. And maybe if I start walking on crutches, John will give me a job. He knows me A to Z, how I think and how I work. I am still in full-time work, and I will be to my last day, because I can't handle this slavery, colonialism, apartheid crap being given as reasons all the time for why should Black African children not get food, not have transport, not have shoes, and are based on charity. May I have food? May I have shoes? May I have books? May I have clothes? I just can't handle it anymore. I now have a mixed race granddaughter. She is what I call my African Punjabi powerhouse. And I'm bringing her up because I've fired her parents. They can't bring her up. I am bringing her up. So John, I'll be sending my CD. So yes, it was unfortunate. I lost my PA. My 51-year-old PA died. And that was sad. And 3 of my best friends died. And so many people in the center lost. And then we started to lose funding. But I love what John said, and it is an absolute mantra. You can only work with what you have, and steps and steps and steps and steps.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thanks for your work. Actually, thanks to you, Sharanjit, for your commitment, and thanks to each and every one of you on the panel, and I'm sure beyond, for your commitment. I'm going to encourage, if there's anybody who's not on the panel, who also wants to say something, please put your hand up. But in the meanwhile, I've just got a question for Rihanna. Rihanna, is it possible to elaborate a little on what the key evidence required by the funders is? Do you have any specific tips you could have for fund seekers who may be applying?
I think the most important thing is evidence of success. Evidence of impact, evidence of the value you create, evidence of the change you bring about, evidence of the difference that you make. So it is all about that. It's nothing else really matters, because we're all working in the same sector, trying to achieve the same kind of change and outcomes. So that's the first kind of leading story. I also want people to think, beyond finance. For organizations to be successful, what else do you need? I think we're getting stuck in certain paradigms. So that for me is important. And then the last thing I do want to say, I think the future of the sector is multi-actor, it's multi-sectoral, it's multi-generational. If we take that in consideration, this country and our problems, particularly as far as education is concerned, it's not going to be solved by one organization, by one approach, by one intervention. This will take all of us. And so collaboration and partnership, co-design, co-engagement, partnerships are extremely important going forward. That is just my closing input. Thank you.
Thank you for that closing input, Rihanna. In fact, I'm going to ask, we are going to wrap up soon. Thanks for everybody. We're a little bit over time, but thank you for staying there. I think, this has sparked so many questions, ideas, which I think is the point of it, but there's obviously still a long way to go. I would like to ask closing comments from all panel members. But maybe before I do that, I see there's another message from Strawn came in. So let me read that. Very important point, and also affects the direction learners take at university, not being able to pursue science, biology, medicine, because they do not have STEM proficiency from school level. I saw it in my own experience with many in humanities, where there isn't enough demand for some of those skills for our economy. There is an irony. Carl Sagan said it. We live in a world created by science and technology, but people do not understand science and technology. Very well put, actually. So a parting comment from each of you. I'm not sure, I think that Percy, let's have something from you.
Thank you,
Percy,
Nikki.
you're on mute.
Thank you.
Percy, any parting comments?
Mute.
Well, I think I'm the one who froze now.
Yep.
Okay, am
Hello?
I audible?
Like, we can hear you, Percy. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll go ahead. Thanks to Nikki and to the panel and for, the participants for those interesting comments as well. I think, one of the things that as we think about these issues and the questions, one of the things that we have to then also deal with is, what is the future labor market looking like? We may be stuck in our ways in terms of education, the 12-year program, the university program, 4-year program, 3-year program, but the future is different. And how do we ensure that our kids are not left behind? The comment on the 4IR issue there is I think it's very to the point, very much to the point. So how does it look like, and how do we ensure that we prepare our young people for that future? But in addition to that, how do we make sure that we expose them to the different possibilities and create opportunities for them so that they can take advantage of all of these? It's a long way to go, many questions to be asked, but together we can do more. And I liked your point, Rihanna, that we have to come together and coordinate some of these things and make sure that we spend the resources effectively as well as we do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Percy. Sorry, I got kicked out for a minute. John, any parting shots?
Yeah, I think from the GTI's point of view, we want to collaborate. We want to work right across the sector. We are training teachers for foundation level, for primary level, for senior secondary level. And the solution lies in integrated solutions, not siloed solutions any longer. So we know that there's a common denominator, that any teacher who is developed and trained with imagination, creativity, and the ability to inspire becomes a multiplier of impact, and not just another add-on. So we would love to engage with anybody in the room to say, how could we work together? And Faye is in the room, Faye Hodser, who is the CEO. You feel free to connect with him and say, let's explore that. We'd love to go into exploration, which was one of your invitations right up front, Nikki. But thank you for the opportunity. I think Nikki's in the freezer again. Maybe the next person who hasn't had the final comment.
Rihanna.
Yeah.
I think Mitzi has gone now, and Rihanna has already actually given her closing comments. So I think on that note, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. It was really, really inspiring. And oh, here comes Nikki. Let me let her in quickly.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I got thrown out of Zoom a couple of times and I missed John's parting shot. But thank you all for attending, and thanks to everybody in the audience as well. Very, very much appreciated. Don't forget, you can contact Lisa at switchedu.online, or you can call 010-822-1439. At Switch, we really would love to continue this conversation regarding funding and fundraising sector, because it really is important. We look forward to partnering with NPOs, NGOs, private companies, crowdfunding platforms, and anyone else who's on a mission to transform and support these special children across South Africa. to be future privileged. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you and good night.